You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Hi, this is Daniel.
This is JT.
And the purpose of this video is to talk to you about the Jehovah's Witnesses and the United Nations. Things you should know.
Yeah.
JT, so let's talk.
All right.
So what should our people know about the Jehovah's Witnesses and the United Nations? For some, this is going to sound obscure. What do the United Nations and the Jehovah's Witnesses have to do with one another?
Yeah. Well, you kind of you got to roll the clock back a little bit. When what was known as the League of Nations, after World War I, government set up the League of Nations. Jehovah's Witnesses jumped on it as soon as they set up, and their basic position was very simple, that the League of Nations was a counterfeit substitute kingdom for God's kingdom. Okay? That was the position they took. As a result, any religious denomination that had any working relationship, friendly relationship, whatever relationship with the League of Nations, they was sinning against God. That was their basic position. Of course, we know over the years the League of Nations collapsed, and then they set up what we have today, the United Nations. Once again, Jehovah's Witnesses back in the 40s, they jumped on it again. Any religion that has any connection, working relationship with the United Nations, they're sinning against God. In fact, they refer to it as going down to Egypt. You're going to get help from Egypt instead of relying on God. So that was their position. It was very clear. Magazines after magazines, talks after talk, every Jehovah's Witness knew this until an article came out in a magazine called The Guardian. And in The Guardian, this magazine pointed out that for a number of years, almost about 10 years, the Watchtower had been what is known as an accredited NGO of the United Nations.
Ooh.
The same relationship that the other denominations they had condemned as sinning against God and so forth. And it was amazing. I had a personal experience with two brothers who went off on me about that.
Tell me about it. Tell us about it. Well, by the way, let me connect this dot. What I hear you saying is it sounds like it's a non-issue, United Nations, Jehovah's Witnesses, but you get underneath the surface and what you find out, it's a position that the Jehovah's Witnesses took after World War I, League of Nations, World War II, United Nations, and their position essentially was that it was wicked.
Basically.
Any involvement.
That was it.
And they were bashing and harassing other organizations, churches, etc.
Yes.
And come to find out, when you look underneath the cover, they were double dipping. Double-faced.
That's exactly right. So I remember when it first broke, I mentioned this to two fellow elders. They went up one side and down the other side on me, man. They was quoting bound volumes, magazines. The society would never be involved with the United Nations in any way. You just lying, the information you guys just lied. And so I was telling them, I said, look, man, go to the United Nations website and look at their directory, their listing of who are considered accredited NGOs. I don't want to read that. That's just some apostate stuff. These boys went off, man. It was funny. They was quoting bound volumes, man. I said, oh, man. So because it became such an issue, the society had to address it.
Okay.
So when the society first came out with, yes, we were involved with the United Nations. We will concede that we were involved, but it was for the purpose of getting a library card. And so these same two guys who went up one side, down the other, all of a sudden, man, 180. Well, society, they can do things like that. And so I'm looking, I can't believe this. You guys was quoting scriptures, giving me all the scriptural reasons why the society would never do this. And now when they come out and say it, you just flip 180. And I just sat there, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. What we will do to defend whatever the society does. And so when you start digging a little bit, you find that it was a little bit more than a library card. One of the things that witnesses will often say, and they'll try to defend it, they'll say, well, the society was a different type of NGO. They weren't the ones who were doing this and doing that. And so the question you really have to ask is, what is the purpose of the UN creating this entity group known as accredited NGOs. And you can actually go all the way back to 1947. The purpose of having an accredited NGO, the UN wanted to have people and groups that would be their partners. Partners in helping them to fulfill their mission, which is an absolute contradiction to what Jehovah's Witnesses have been teaching forever. So basically the Watchtower were partners with the United Nations in fulfilling its role. The same partnership that other denominations had that they resoundingly condemn. And so what you're looking at is how when Jehovah's Witnesses many times are presented with facts, evidence, it does not matter. At the end of the day, a Jehovah's Witness is trained. You defend the society at all costs. And that's so sad. And this caused a lot of witnesses to literally get that, as you often said, that aha moment. And from that point, there are so many witnesses who they begin to then start digging.
Was that true for you? Was that one of the cracks in the foundation?
Well, actually, we were already gone at that time. But we were just surprised. I mean, I was really surprised. I could not believe when I first heard it. I'm like, society hanging out with the United Nations. And but what happened is, it's interesting when you start doing a little digging, it's interesting what part of the United Nations they were affiliated with. There's a section of the United Nations called DPI. And this is really just the public relations department of the United Nations. And so the United Nations has these NGOs who are to assist their public relations department to get out the good word. I mean, when you think about it, can you imagine the Apostle Paul hanging out with Caesars, Pontius Pilate,
Right.
public relations department to get out the good word about the kingdom? You just can't. And so you have what is often the public image and the private image. And that's that, as you said, that's that two-faced look that you see when you start digging. And that's why, once again, questions, don't ask the wrong questions. Don't ask the wrong questions.
Double dipping.
Double dipping.
United Nations was the subject today.
Yep.
The truth about
Yeah.
I hate to go there, folks.
Yeah.
Don't like to put it that way. But the reality is that the truth about a lie, folks are not being taught the truth about their own organization.
About their own organization.
This is Daniel.
JT.
Hey, this is another video from our heart to yours, trying to be helpful to you and yours.
Yes.
We'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Take care of yourself.
What I remember about the UN when I was growing up, according to the Watchtower's definition, it is the wild beast.
Yes.
And every Jehovah's Witness knew that you don't have anything to do with the wild beast.
Yeah.
That was all I remember.
Yeah. As a kid, I remember as well.
Yeah.
You probably remember those pictures that the societies would have of the wild beast and the seven heads, and then they would have the woman on the back, and that
And
was
the
supposed
10 diadems.
Yeah, the whole 9 yards, whole 9 yards, right? And so you'd be scared to death because there's always, these revelation images that they would create from the writing department, art department. And they would always say that any religion that was involved in anything to do with the United Nations, they condemned it. They made no exceptions. They made no nothing. If your religion or your denomination was working with the United Nations, then you was an enemy of God. Because their definition of the United Nations was that it represents a counterfeit kingdom to God's kingdom. So anything that was supportive in any way, it was a no-no. And everybody knew that. Even as Jehovah's kids, we knew that. And so this whole issue, for some people, this is actually what has stopped them dead in their tracks when this was introduced to them. When you're discussing the subject of Jehovah's Witness, the Watchtower Society, and the United Nations, there are typically 3 types of Jehovah's Witnesses that you will run into. The first one is one who literally has no knowledge or any information, has never even heard of that the Watchtower had a relationship with the United Nations. And so off the bat, this Jehovah's Witness, he goes straight into denial. This is just lies made up by apostate. And the list just goes on and on. The second one is the witness who they have come to have knowledge that the Watchtower was involved for about 10 years with the United Nations. But what they do, they fall into defense mode. They start coming up with every type of excuse as to why it was okay. And then you have the third. The third is the witness who is willing to actually take the time to examine why the Watchtower had this relationship and how the hypocrisy and the contradiction of having that relationship was. And interestingly, that's the one who often will leave, is that third one, because he's willing to examine it openly.
So now let's talk about those three things. Then.
Okay.
Let's break it down so people can really understand it. Because here's one of the things that I find when I'm talking to people who have left the organization, and they will ask me a question. They'll say, "Well, should I tell my family about the Jehovah's Witnesses in the United Nations?" And a lot of times they just say they were part of the United Nations, but they really don't tell them exactly all that's involved. So can you just kind of break it down to our listening audience so they can just really understand it?
And I think this is probably the core thing that people need to understand. When we go to a Jehovah's Witness and we're trying to present them with something, we have to remember ourselves what this actually means. Because what we're about to tell them, in essence, I mean, as a bottom line, we're about to tell them, man, you just wasted your life for 35 years. And when you're going to tell someone something like that, you need to understand this is going to be hard for that person to accept. And so we have to keep in mind, you get right to tell this person that they've been living a lie all of their life. And that's very difficult to understand as a person and accept. So we have to be more understanding that this is going to be some hard information that they're going to get hit with. So as I mentioned before, the second witness is the interesting one because he will start making excuses and he will also begin to play word games. Sometimes you will hear the phrase used that the Watchtower was a member of the United Nations. Well, they weren't really a member of the United Nations because you only can be a country in order to be a member of the United Nations. You have to be a country. But what they were is they were an NGO, which is a non-governmental organization. So basically you have governments and you have organizations. They're not governments. So you get that by definition. And there are millions of non-government organizations, and they call them NGOs, right? So the difference is in what we're discussing is what is known as an accredited NGO, a UN accredited NGO, which means you have been approved by meeting certain criteria that the UN sets up. And I think when you talk to witnesses, and there are people, there are sites up there that will try to make the argument, the first thing that they'll say is, well, there are different types of NGOs that works with the United Nations. And that's true. That's very true. That is an absolute statement. That is a true statement. But what the person does not want to address, and this is the most important part when you're having this discussion with a family member, whoever, is that you establish what is the purpose of the UN having accredited NGOs. And the purpose of the NGOs is that these are their partners. And so we're going to show just a couple of little examples. In fact, you can actually just Google it. NGO, partners, 1947, and the UN. Just those 4 words. And it will bring back to you where it shows what is the purpose of an NGO. The purpose of an NGO is that the United Nations not only wanted to have countries working with them in their goal and their mission, they wanted to have other entities and other groups doing the same thing. And so as a result, they literally created what's called an accredited NGO program. And these are their partners. Look at some of these quotes just as an example.
Non-government organizations, NGOs, have been partners of the Department of Public Information, DPI, since its establishment in 1947. Official relationships between DPI and NGOs date back to 1968.
That's exactly right. So we're talking about 2 interesting words, partners and relationship. These were the very 2 things that the Watchtower literally condemned every religion for having with the United Nations. And so here you have the United Nations themselves saying that we consider our NGOs as our partners. Now, what do you think the word partner means?
Well, let's look it up in the dictionary what a partner means. Well, partner is an ally, associate, colleague, companion, their friend.
Yes. This is the relationship that the United Nations has with its NGOs. And here you have the Watchtower having that same relationship. That's absolutely amazing. And that's why a lot of witnesses, when they begin to start digging in, they was like, well, how can the society have the same relationship that they condemn other groups from having?
Yeah, because the one that I'm looking at with the synonym is friend. And they're always saying you can't be friends with people in the world and maintain your relationship with God.
Yeah,
And here they are, a partner with the United Nations, and that's considered a friend.
Yeah. It's sort of like in a law firm. In a law firm, you have different types of partners who have different types of roles. And that's what NGOs that work with the United Nations has. They have different roles. But at the end of the day, they're on the same team. They're trying to accomplish the same thing. Law firm, you have senior partners, you have junior partners. But at the end of the day, everybody's trying to win the case. And that's the whole purpose that the United Nations created NGOs. They wanted to have partners and those working with them to carry out whatever their purpose is. It kind of reminds you of the Super Bowl. I know for years I had no idea that typically when a Super Bowl team wins, you think that just the players might get the rings. But from what I understand, literally everybody in the organization, even back at the office, everybody gets a Super Bowl ring. And the reason why is because they're all on the same team. Their goal is to win a Super Bowl from the water boy right to the quarterback. That's everybody's goal for the year. And so the UN has set up these NGOs for the purpose of carrying out whatever mission they have.
Right.
So we see the hypocrisy, and this is what has caused many witnesses to literally just stop. And at that point, like with us, these are the things that, as Daniel would say, these are your aha moments.
Right.
That should lead you to stop, take the time, and start asking some serious questions.
I'm going to tell you, I know that when we had already left the organization, before we found out about this UN situation, but I'll tell you what, it was like the icing on the cake as to why, we didn't make a mistake in leaving.
We did not make a mistake.
We kept it moving and realized that, in doing our research, waking up and seeing that the society was not who they said they were, and then finding out about the UN really gave us further proof that we did the right thing in leaving. Yeah.
The society ends up basically speaking out both sides of its mouth. It condemns others for the very same thing that it does. The Watchtower says other religions were going down to Egypt for help, as it were. Well, we find out they're going down to Egypt for help as well. So, and that's why they had to keep it secret. For 10 years, no Jehovah's Witness even knew anything about the United Nations. In fact, if it hadn't been for a newspaper article that revealed it, they would probably kept on going, which is just, once again, speaking out both sides of their mouth.
I think it's really sad because when I was coming along and you wanted to join up for student council, and by the time I was old enough to understand what student council was all about, I already had a bad taste in my mouth from the teachings of the Watchtower that I shouldn't even want to be involved in that.
Yeah.
Anything
nothing to do with politics. Yeah, political,
right.
you don't touch it. And so here we see the society is right there. And as we mentioned in the video with Daniel, it's just ironic of all departments that the society hooked up with is the public relations department.
Yeah.
I mean, the society is like, what is the purpose of any of the public relations department? Even the Watchtower at the summer conventions, they have news service. And the purpose of news service is to get out a good message about what's going on at the convention. And so here you got the Watchtower hooking up with the DPI, which is a news service for all practical purposes, to get out the good word about the United Nations. It's the hypocrisy that causes people to stop and re-examine things.
Right.
So
that's true.
It was interesting. So we hope that we just had the opportunity to share some interesting thoughts about how to look at the UN, how to discuss the UN with people, and we hope that it helps all of you.
Right. Well, all I can say to those of you who are listening to this podcast is to do your research about the Jehovah's Witnesses and the United Nations and be true to yourself. Don't just say that's not true, but really do your research.
Yeah. Take the time, do it, and you'll see it. It's there. Just start digging. That's all we tell people to do. Do the digging. The information's out there. We tell people all the time, in the year 2018, to be ignorant about Jehovah's Witnesses today is by choice. There's just too much information out there that you can access and read it for yourself and evaluate it for yourself. Do your homework, as they say. This is JT.
And this has been Lady C.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.